Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to look at how you can create dynamic bar charts using data sets brought in through Data Source Manager and animate them all inside of vMix. But before we get to the show, I just want to welcome everybody. If you have any questions, any comments, please just post them and we'll get to them as we do the show. Also, if you'd like to join us on the show, we have a link in the show notes that will allow you to call in and somebody can get you on air with us here. Okay, so let's get started. And probably the best place to start would be letting me show you exactly what we want to accomplish here. And so if we go over to the vMix output, this could be an example where you have somebody that's going through, statistics or other types of performance metrics, and you now can have charts that, as you go through, in this case, we're just sort of going through months at a time here. You could actually look at, having those bar charts animate. Not only that, but if you'll notice, the total number of items that we're sort of distributing these bar charts across is changing. So we are both compensating for the number of items in each chart, but also for how that represents the full percentage. So really what you're seeing on here is we're taking numbers and then converting those into percentages and using these bars to represent the percentages of the total. So hopefully this makes sense, what we're looking to do, and we can dive into what we want to do with this. So the first thing to look at will be our vMix preset. And in the preset, we have a number of items that we have set up here. So I'll sort of walk through this, and hopefully we'll be able to sort of cover all the foundational elements that we're using to make this happen. So we have a couple of things here in the beginning. So like our first is just our talent shots. That would be our regular camera. We also have a PNG file, which is an axis that overlays it. So when you look up here, that's this axis that's sort of along the bottom and along the side here as we're going through that. And then the core of what we do is we actually have two inputs that are here that are set up with each of the bars lined up as layers inside that input. And the way we manage to do all of our transitions between different data sets is we have both as what we call bar set 1 and bar set 2, these two inputs. We have them in a mix, and we do a merge between them. So when I have my current, what's being displayed set, that's going to be in bar set 2. And then what I'll do is I'll put the new data values we have in bar set 1, and that will all be reflected in the mix over here. And then we do the merge, which transitions it. And like we did last time, after that merge takes place, I set them both up and sort of reset it so bar set 2 now has the new one again. And we'll go through that when we do the scripting. And as we mentioned, since we have the layers that we have for this, we have these 4 inputs, which are our different bars that we're using here. And then we have the overlays that we use. And again, we have to have 2 sets of overlays because when we do this sort of transition, I have to populate one bar, and then populating that bar, I'm changing the overlay because that's being taken right from my data source. So I use this again to sort of say I have my current one and my next one, and then I do those transitions. And I do that both for the core bars that we have here, as well as for the overlays that are sort of the legend for those bars. And then what I do is I actually package all of that into what I call a chart display, which is essentially what you see in this piece right here. So if I were to just put this sort of in here, this is just this in a window. So we layer that out for our news set that we have here with everything in that. So this is sort of a very straightforward approach to this. And like we did in our last show, we have a data source that's coming from an Excel spreadsheet. And because, again, we're doing this thing where we're doing merges between things, so we have to change data on one input and not change it on the other to make sure these merges happen correctly. So we've taken the same Excel spreadsheet and created a data source from that on both of these, for both of these inputs. And so we have the same, same thing we did in our last show, one original data source, but we bring them in as 2 separate sources inside of vMix so we can manipulate them independently and have different rows be selected in both. So the Excel spreadsheet, let me talk a little bit about that. So I have that sitting over here. So let me sort of zoom this here. So the way we have the data set up is that we have a set of values that are coming in here across. So this is for each one of the bars that we have, bar 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then in this cell, we simply add them together so we know what's the total number. So we know that's the maximum value that we can have on that bar. Because, if you turn around and sort of look at this, this is how we're going to have to calculate percentages. So 35 is a certain percentage of 210, 70 is a certain percentage of 210. So that sort of thing as we move across. So we do this, and we do that calculation over here. We do this directly inside of Excel just to make it easier. So this is the percentage that bar 1, sort of this 45, represents 21% of 210. So that's basically it. And so these again, just are a calculation where we take and calculate the percentage based on all the numbers we have here. And then everything else we have from here over are just labels. So that's the labels we use for each one of the bars and the label across the top that we use to sort of indicate what this chart is showing. So that's sort of where we're starting with this. So we have everything, sort of set up for how we'd want to handle this. And then everything else now comes down to handling this inside of our scripting. So the first script we have is something where this will just sort of initialize everything to make sure that we have a good start point. And so that's just the first script is just bar chart init. And it does a few things, but basically it presents that first chart on screen. And these are all the things that we pulled outside of, right out from our Excel spreadsheet. We have our maximum value and each one of the values for each of the bars. So that's directly pulled out of our Excel spreadsheet. And we're doing that, we're getting these values by going in and reading them out from a GT title. And we'll get to that in a moment, how we do that. So the other thing that we have is we use a mechanism to determine where, how to display each bar so it reflects the value that's behind it. And we'll go into that, but we keep this as a floating point double, and I'll explain exactly how that's used as we go further down. And then we just turn around and say, which chart row am I looking for? So in the Excel spreadsheet, we have all the rows, and this is just saying, which row am I looking at to pull this data from? So we then start off with our usual, let's load in the vMix XML here. And we're pulling our chart row, the row that we want to display, the chart we want to display, out of dynamic value 1. So this is, again, something we do this an awful lot here. So we're just pulling this out with select single node. That's the XPath to that, and we pull the text out. So that's giving us the row that we want. And then we're going and saying, now that I know the row we want, we actually do a data source select row. So we're pulling that data now into our GT title. And because we pulled new data in, that changes the values that are inside our vMix XML, which is where we're reading all of these things from. And because we do that, we now have to reload it. So in doing, anytime you do something that requires an update, that will perform an update to the XML, to the state of vMix, you need to do another load XML to make sure you pull that state in and have that as your current state you're working with. So once we have that, so now we have the row, I am just going in and pulling all of the values that I want from max and all of my bar values off of my GT title. And remember I said we have the two titles, so we're just using title bar chart values 2, which is the input for the sort of the current displayed one. And we're pulling out all of these elements here. So let me see if I slide this over a bit. So you can see here, we're pulling the max and each one of the bar values, pulling them out as text and converting them to integers. And so it's a very sort of straightforward process. We're just reading out of the title now that it's been refreshed through the load XML. And here's how we do the actual display of that bar chart on the screen. And this will just take a little bit of conceptual thought, but it should be pretty clear. What we're doing is we have this whole bar sitting there, and it's sort of going from the start of the screen to the end of start of the input to the end of the input. So if we actually switch back to the preset here on vMix, I can show this more directly. So if I look at this, this is basically how I have this bar set up. And to give you a look at how this would be represented in one of these bar sets that we have, each one of these bars is sitting out here inside of as layers. And the way we manipulate that is if I go into layers and then look at position, let's take for bar chart 1, I am going and I am using the pan X to slide this in and out. So if I sort of move this, you can now see that that bar is growing. And when I reset this to 0, so let me sort of go here and reset this, that means I'm at the full size of the bar. So this is 100% for this bar. And if I slide this down, you'll see it goes away until I get to -2. So -2 in this case represents 0. So all my values, in the way I control the size of these bars, is I position them to a pan X between -2, which is what it's 0, and 0, which is when it's full 100%. So it's hopefully visually that made more sense than if I were just going through it inside the code. But let's jump over to the code again, and hopefully this will make sense now. So in the script, what I'm doing is I'm taking the value of bar 1 and the max value. And that is essentially a percentage. So it's this much of this much, and that becomes my percentage. So this would be sort of, if it were 50%, what I need this to be is sort of sitting there going, okay, I need to have this now represent -1. So at 50%, you'd want this to be -1. And the reason you want that is because -1 is sort of halfway down between that 0, which is the full, and -2, which is fully off screen. And that's 1. And so that's all we're doing. We're saying you take the percentage and you double it, because now you want to sort of normalize yourself, and you subtract 2. And if you work the math when you do it, this will give you the exact pan you need between 0 and that -2 to get this to display correctly on screen. And so that's all we're doing. And then I'm just going after calculating those values and doing one of the functions I think is new to vMix 27, where I can set the pan-x of individual layers inside an input. And so that's all I'm doing. I'm just taking these offsets we calculate here, and I'm putting them in here and set those pans. So that does that initialization of our first display. And then I just go and put a overlay on top, which is sort of this chart display. So I turn around and say, in chart display, what overlay do I want to use? And so I can pick between bar chart values 1 and bar chart values 2. So since this is our initialization, we put that in there. And then I just cut and put that inside of my mix to say, okay, layer 2 is active, and we're done. So this is how we do the initialization. And it's very, very close to what we do for our next, when we want to do an update and create something which will have that dynamic flow between them. So this is bar chart init, and the other function is bar chart update, which is, again, very, very similar. And we're doing a lot of the same things. So we won't spend a lot of time, but these are all the same things we had calculated, all the max values and the individual values, the offsets that we had. And so the whole first part of this really is pretty close to the same thing we did before, with slight changes. So we, again, are using our dynamic value 1 to determine which row we want. That's going to be our next row. So which one do we want to show next? So because this is our next row, remember we have bar chart values 2 sort of sitting out there right now, and that's what people are looking at. So we're doing everything now in bar chart 1. So all our impacts happen sort of off screen, and then we'll do the merge at the end. So we're doing pretty much the same thing though. We're taking and loading all the values for the row. We turn around and put bar chart set 1 into preview in mix 1. So that's sort of, again, it's just setting it all up. And as before, since we loaded new data, we have to load the XML again. And now we're doing essentially the exact same thing. This time we start with bar chart 1. We get all the max values and all the bar values. We calculate the offsets that we need, and we do the pan X sets for all of those offsets. And then what we're doing is we are basically animating the overlay onto the screen and doing the merge. So that gives us sort of a smooth, here I'm replacing one overlay with the other. And so bar chart 1 at this point, because we did this with the merge, bar chart 1 is now being displayed on screen with all the new values, and that happened through a merge, which gave you that sort of sliding view of each of the bars. We then wait for that merge to complete, and at that point, now we're going to bar chart 2. We're going to set this up identically to what we had in bar chart 1. So we pick the exact same row of data because they're the same across the two. Load the XML again and do exactly what we did in that initialization. Get all of these things set. And then we just, now that they're set, we just wait to make sure all of the updates happened. And then I just cut between bar chart 1 and bar chart 2 in my mix and do the set layer to do the correct overlay. And that has now replaced what was displayed in bar chart 1 on the screen with the identical thing from bar chart 2, but now I'm reset. So everything I do now, when I loop back to do the next one, I can work in bar chart 1 and then move it to bar chart 2 and then swap them back to get it ready for the next iteration. So that is basically the mechanism we use to do this. And I wanted to do something that was relatively straightforward. So just like positioning something, I felt was a very natural type of thing that people have experience with. So hopefully this is something that you could see applying very directly to the types of productions that may need this for yourself. And hopefully, this is something that will be useful, because I know that these types of charts are used in a lot of different productions, and certainly in a lot of different presentations, I'll put it that way. And this may give you a more interesting way to do that going forward. So that actually is everything I had for today's show. And hopefully, this is something that, that you found interesting as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'll sort of close this up and we'll go into our post show. But in the post show, there's a few things I want to cover, a couple of different ways that I had thought of doing this and different possibilities for this. And, so we can sort of dig in there. If you had any questions, we can sort of tunnel more deeply into that. If you can't make the post show, I definitely appreciate you watching this show. For a variety of things that are coming up, I won't have another show until 3 weeks out. So it'll be sort of the first week in September, the first Friday in September, we'll have our next show. So I appreciate everybody for sticking with me as we sort of work through things. And we just have a Spatial Optic just joined us. So Spatial, thank you for saying hello. It's always good to see you here. So what we'll do is we'll wrap this up. If you can't stay for the post show, thank you very much, and I'll see you in 3 weeks. If you can, I'll see you in a moment. Take care, be well. Oh, welcome back to the post show. Thank you, everybody, for working through the Spatial, saying hopefully vMix 30 will be released. There's hopefully there's a lot of stuff I'd love to see in some of the new iterations of vMix, and a lot of it just comes from the shows that we put together here, where we'll work through stuff and we find things that we wish could be done more directly or in a different way. And so there's always a lot of good ideas that come from those types of direct use cases where you deal within limitations and figure out where you'd like to see changes. So I just want to touch on a few things because I thought of different ways to do these bar charts when I was doing this. And even though I selected this sort of pre-canned and just slide them off the screen, the reason that can work is because I set them up as a layer. So if I can actually swing over and bring up the vMix preset again, when I set everything up here as these layers, this layer now is sort of complete on its own. And so I can shrink it and size it and scale it, do whatever I want to position it, which means that I can use the entire thing, even if I'm only going to push it to a portion of the screen. And you can see that's exactly what I've done if you look down here. So here, I actually took, and I'll just show the layers that are on here. Each one of these, if I look at the bar chart values, which is this piece right here, let's see. I have this, mix 2. I actually shrunk this down a little, so it's 0.96. So that's the chart that's coming in is that 0.96. So it shrinks it down, which gives me the space on the sides. So even though in the original input it goes end to end, that allows me to use simple math, so -2 to 0 for nothing up to 100%. This lets me cover that, and then I can position it any way I want. And in fact, you can even do things where you could do things. Now this won't look right here, but I could sort of take and I could rotate these things, and if I wanted to put this in another location or have it go up from the bottom, you could do all of that stuff. So once you have this as a chart and just sort of expands end to end, you can do a lot of different things with that and get this to be wherever you need it to be. So I mean that was one thing, so that's the approach that I decided to take to make this happen. But the other piece to this that I think is really important is that I could have done a lot more with all of the data references that I have here, like for the percentages and other things. Right now, I did them just as a single overlay with all of the values put together in sort of one overlay. And because of that, I couldn't move things around so I couldn't, let me see if I can sort of reset what I did here. Now that you want to do something, it's like 90. So let me go here. There we go. So if I come back over here, if I took around and wanted to put the percentages right at the edge of each of these, I could do that because I know where it is. And so I could have those set up and do pans to each of those to position them. But that would have just made this a more complicated thing. But if you think about the different ways that you can do this, it's important to sort of keep in mind that it doesn't have to be quite like this, because clearly this is not the most elegant look where things are on and off the screen. And this could be something where you could sort of extend this to do, more with that. I just want to, so Guy came on, and Guy had mentioned that he was looking at, interested in how we had done this here. He has something that looks really impressive. If you look on Guy's YouTube channel, he has something which does a bar chart going across the screen as a sort of 0 to 100%, almost like one of those completion type bar charts you see. And he did a really elegant job with that. So thank you, Guy, for joining us. Definitely appreciate it. So that's something to keep in mind. There are more elegant ways you could handle sort of the graphics and the overlays that would have just taken a lot more individual titles that you could then use to move around. You could also do things where the numbers would increment, where you're just writing into the title as you move it. So as you sort of move along, so you could see that sort of dynamic movement with a number as it slides up and down. Again, these are things that could all be done as enhancements. So the other way, though, that I had thought about doing the bar chart itself was to actually do something which could be a video, some sort of slow motion type of thing that would sort of look more gadgety or, certainly more, visually attractive, and use that with a mask and basically just take, in the same way I was doing the panning of the bar itself in this case, I was looking at saying I could actually just pan a mask, have a mask instead of that bar, and use that mask on top of the bar chart and use that to slide across. So you could have something animated going on underneath that as you were doing that. So that's another way that you could conceivably, approach this, which uses the same core elements, but, has a different visual outcome as well. So that's really everything I wanted to cover. I know this hasn't been a very long show, but hopefully everybody found it interesting. And, if you have any other questions, I think feel free to, message me, post it in the Streaming Alchemy group, and I'll try to respond. But I just want to say thank you, everybody, for taking the time to watch today. And as I mentioned, just as we wrapped up the show, it will be 3 weeks. So our next show will be on the first Friday in September. And I apologize for the lag. There's just a lot happening between now and then. And hopefully you'll be able to join us all. And hopefully we'll be getting season 5 kicked off in the fall. And I'm looking forward to that as well. So thank you, everybody. Definitely appreciate you joining. And until the next show, be safe, be well. See you then.